The morning was perfect, the kind of perfect that made you believe every cliché about suburban life. Sun filtering through the oak trees, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves, and the distant hum of a lawnmower playing a lazy soundtrack. Alex, a man in his late 20s with a perpetually relaxed demeanor, sighed contentedly as he took a sip of his coffee. He was a simple man with a simple routine: wake up, brew a French press, and enjoy the quiet morning on his front porch. It was his small slice of peace, a daily ritual he wouldn't trade for anything. His porch was nothing fancy. Two wicker chairs, a small table, and a few potted ferns. It was a lived-in space, comfortable and inviting. He had moved into this quiet, well-kept community 3 years ago, drawn by the perfectly manicured lawns and the promise of a peaceful existence. He knew there was an HOA, a Homeowners Association, but he had always seen it as a background hum, the group that handled the community pool and kept the lawns looking neat. He had never once imagined it would become the central point of his life. He was just about to take another sip of his dark roast when he heard a sound that didn't fit the peaceful morning melody. It was the sharp click of high heels on the sidewalk, a sound that carried with it a sense of purpose and, more importantly, a sense of impending doom. He looked up and saw her. The name was a running joke among the younger homeowners, a hush nickname for the woman who, for some reason, had been elected president of the HOA and seemed to have no other hobby besides policing her neighbors. She was a woman in her early 50s with a severe bob haircut, a perfectly tailored pastel blazer, and a gaze that could curdle milk. She walked with a purpose, her shoulders back and her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. She wasn't just walking, she was on patrol. "Good morning, Alex," she said, her voice a bit too loud for the peaceful street. Her smile was tight, a mask of forced pleasantness. "Lovely morning, isn't it?" Alex put his coffee mug down on the small table and offered a genuine smile. "It is, Brenda. Can't beat it." She took a step closer, her eyes scanning his porch, not with a friendly curiosity, but with the cold, calculating look of an inspector. Her gaze lingered on the mug in his hand, then on the coffee pot he had sitting next to it. A slow, triumphant look spread across her face, as if she had just found a smoking gun. "I'm afraid I have to bring something to your attention," she announced, her voice dropping to a formal, almost theatrical tone. She tapped her clipboard with her pen. "As you know, our community is governed by a set of bylaws, which we all signed and agreed to upon purchase of our homes." Alex's smile faltered. He had a sinking feeling in his stomach. "Right, and, according to Section 4, C. 1, subsection B, on exterior modifications and public appearance, there are very clear rules regarding clutter." She paused for dramatic effect, letting the word hang in the air like a grave accusation. "A pot, a mug, and a table are all fine, but the combination of these items, used as a permanent fixture on the front porch, creates a visual inconsistency. Furthermore, the presence of a beverage could be seen as an unauthorized public gathering, even if it's just one person." Alex blinked. He looked from her clipboard to his mug, then back at her face, trying to process the sheer ridiculousness of her words. He wasn't having a party, he was having a cup of coffee. He wasn't a public nuisance, he was a man enjoying his morning. "Brenda, I'm at us having coffee," he said, the absurdity of the situation making him want to laugh. "It's my morning routine. I bring the stuff out, drink it, and then I take it inside. It's not a permanent fixture." Brenda's smile vanished, replaced by a stern, unwavering expression. "The bylaws state that all exterior spaces must be maintained to the highest aesthetic standards. The visible act of brewing and consuming a beverage, in plain sight of the public way, creates a potential precedent for others to follow. We can't have our community turning into a coffee shop." The finality in her voice left no room for debate. She had made up her mind, and in her world, her word was law. Alex's peaceful morning had just been shattered, replaced by an unbelievable, petty conflict. He felt a wave of frustration, but also a new, simmering resolve. This was ridiculous. This was his home. And this woman was trying to police his morning cup of coffee. "I'll be sending you a formal notice," Brenda said, already turning to walk away. "I suggest you read through the bylaws carefully. This is your first warning." She clicked away, her heels echoing down the street, leaving Alex alone with his coffee. The sun still shone, the birds still sang, but the morning had lost its perfect glow. Alex picked up his mug, the once comforting warmth now feeling like a burden. This wasn't over. Not even close. The very next day, a crisp white envelope arrived in Alex's mailbox. Its official HOA letterhead a beacon of trouble. He pulled it out, a heavy sigh escaping his lips. Inside, he found the formal notice Brenda had promised. The notice was titled Violation of Public Amenity Code, and it was a masterpiece of corporate jargon applied to the mundane. The fine, an absurd $50 for the unauthorized use of the front porch at a designated commercial coffee establishment. Below it was a line item for an additional $25 for excessive foot traffic during a non-sanctioned event. A fine for his mailman, presumably. Alex stared at the paper, a laugh of pure disbelief bubbling up in his chest. A commercial coffee establishment. He had a single mug. His initial amusement quickly turned to simmering frustration. He couldn't just ignore this. He grabbed his copy of the HOA bylaws, a thick pamphlet he had never bothered to read, and found the section Brenda had cited. It was an abstract and vague paragraph about maintaining the aesthetic and structural integrity of the community. There was no mention of coffee, cups, or unauthorized public gatherings. The whole thing was based on her personal, obsessive interpretation. Alex decided he would not pay the fine. He would fight it. He walked over to Brenda's house, a meticulously kept fortress of perfect landscaping. The lawn was cut so short it looked like astroturf, and not a single leaf dared to fall onto her driveway. He rang the doorbell, his copy of the bylaws clutched in his hand. Brenda opened the door, her face a mask of practiced politeness that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Alex, I trust you received the notice." "I did," Alex said, trying to keep his voice calm and reasonable. "Brenda, there's been a misunderstanding. I read the bylaws, and there's nothing in here that prohibits me from having coffee on my porch. It's my property." She didn't even look at the pamphlet in his hand. "The bylaws are open to interpretation, Alex, and as president, it is my duty to interpret them in a way that protects the integrity of our community. I am simply enforcing the rules we all agreed to." "You're inventing a rule," Alex countered, his voice rising slightly in frustration. "You can't fine me for having coffee. It's insane. This isn't a rule. It's a personal vendetta." Brenda's eyes narrowed, her smile tightening. "I beg to differ. We must prevent a slippery slope. Today it's a coffee mug. Tomorrow it's a full-sized hammock. The day after that a folding table and chairs for a yard sale. We must hold the line, Alex. The integrity of our community depends on it." Her argument was completely illogical, a circular web of bureaucracy and paranoia. She genuinely believed she was a heroic guardian of the neighborhood, fighting against the forces of casual porch sitting. Alex realized he was talking to a brick wall. Logic was not a tool that worked on Brenda Karen. "So, you're really going to fine me for drinking coffee?" Alex asked, defeated. "It's not just a fine, Alex. It's a message. I suggest you pay it promptly to avoid a late fee." Alex shook his head and walked away, the futility of the conversation hanging in the air. He was a man who preferred to avoid conflict, but Brenda was making it impossible. This was no longer just a weird HOA dispute. It was a bizarre, personal crusade. Later that evening, as Alex was watering his small collection of potted ferns on the porch, a notification popped up on his phone. It was an email from the HOA. He opened it, dreading what he might find, and his jaw went slack. The subject line read, "New violation, aesthetic inconsistency, The email detailed a new fine for the use of non-conforming plant containers. The reason: his clay pots were an inappropriate shade of terracotta, clashing with the neighborhood's neutral color palette. The fine was another $50. Alex stared at his pots, then at the email. It wasn't about the coffee, or the porch, or the bylaws. It was about control. It was about Brenda Karen, and he knew right then that if he didn't fight back, this would never end. He wasn't just fighting for his coffee anymore, he was fighting for his peace of mind. The second fine, for inappropriate terracotta, was a punch to the gut. It wasn't just a fine anymore, it was a psychological attack. Brenda Karen wasn't enforcing rules, she was inventing them to torment him. Alex stared at the email, a cold fury rising in him. This wasn't a fight he could win alone. He needed a strategy, and more than that, he needed allies. Brenda's reign of terror had to have affected other people. He just had to find them. He started. Subtly, on his next morning run, he made a point to greet neighbors he usually only gave a quick nod to. Most were polite, but he saw the same wary look in their eyes. They knew Brenda. The HOA was a silent, looming presence in their lives, a shadow they all lived under. It wasn't until he saw Mrs. Gable from 2 doors down that he had a breakthrough. She was an elderly woman known for her beautiful rose garden. Her face was a storm cloud as she knelt by a bush, pulling at the roses with a frustrated huff. "Morning, Mrs. Gable," Alex said, stopping his run. "Everything all right?" she sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Oh, Alex, it's that Brenda Karen. She sent me a notice. Says my rose trellis is unauthorized ornamentation and that the red roses are too vibrant and clash with the neighborhood's calm aesthetic. She's demanding I replace them with white ones." A wave of validation washed over Alex. He wasn't crazy. Brenda's rules were not just for him. "She fined me for my coffee pot," he said, and for the first time, Mrs. Gable's sad expression shifted to one of pure outrage. "The woman is a menace," Mrs. Gable declared, rising from her knees. "She's trying to control every aspect of our lives. We have to do something," Alex agreed, and that same evening, a small, secret meeting took place in Alex's living room. Alex, Mrs. Gable, and a younger couple, Sarah and Mark, who had been fined for putting up a tasteful welcome mat that apparently violated the porch area square footage ordinance, were all present. They had become a small band of rebels, united by a common enemy. "We can't just pay these fines," Alex said, laying out the stack of notices on his coffee table. "She just keep inventing more. We have to find a way to beat her at her own game." Sarah, who was an accountant and had a sharp, analytical mind, picked up the HOA bylaws. "She keeps citing these. We need to go through them line by line and find a weakness." "Maybe she's misquoting something," Mark suggested. "What about the HOAS records? Who else has she fined? Maybe we can find a pattern of abuse. We can check the public records for the HOAS minutes." The investigation began. They pored over the bylaws, highlighting every vague or ambiguous rule. They went to the local town hall and requested the public-facing HOA documents, including meeting minutes and election records. It was tedious work, but with each passing hour, they felt more empowered. They weren't just victims anymore. They were a team with a mission. Their breakthrough came after 3 long nights of sifting through dusty, poorly scanned PDF files. They were looking at the minutes from the annual meeting 2 years ago, the one where Brenda was elected president. The document was a mess of typos and confusing language, but Sarah's sharp eyes caught something a regular person would have missed. "Wait a minute," she said, her finger tracing a line on the screen. "Look at this. The election was called with 15 votes in favor of Brenda and 14 for the other candidate. It says it was a unanimous decision." "Unanimous," Alex said, leaning in. "But 15 to 14 is not unanimous. That's a majority." "Sure, but not unanimous." "Exactly," Sarah said, her voice filled with a rising excitement. "But look at the next line. The meeting was closed after the unanimous vote of the attending members. This is where it gets interesting. The bylaws state that for any major decision, including the election of a president, there must be a quorum, a minimum number of homeowners present. And the number is stated right here, 25. The meeting only had 29 people, but the number of votes was 29. Wait, something is wrong here. Alex and Mark crowded around the laptop. Sarah continued, if 15 people voted for Brenda and 14 for the other person, that's a total of 29 votes. But the quorum is 25. That's fine. But it also says that unanimous decisions require all members to be present, and that all members were present. That's not the case. The bylaws say 40 homes are in the community, not 29. Something is off. The more they dug, the more they realized the entire meeting was a sham, a convoluted mess of lies and misinterpretations designed to give Brenda power. There were dozens of homeowners who didn't even attend, and the minutes had a suspicious paragraph that seemed to justify the vote. But it was just more jargon. They finally found the clincher. A small, almost invisible footnote at the bottom of the page that referenced a bylaw revision from 20 years ago. A revision so old it was almost forgotten, that required the HOA president to be a primary homeowner for at least 10 years. Brenda and her husband moved in 8 years ago. Mrs. Gable said, her eyes wide. I remember it distinctly. Alex felt a rush of adrenaline. He was right. Brenda hadn't just been misquoting rules. She was operating on a faulty foundation. They had found their loophole, a fatal flaw in her authority. They had the ammunition they needed, and the time for a quiet fight was over. Now, they were ready for a public showdown. The air in the community clubhouse was thick with a tense, oppressive silence, broken only by the low hum of the air conditioning. It was the annual HOA meeting, and Brenda Karen, in a power blue blazer and a smile that looked bolted to her face, stood at the podium. She was a general surveying her troops, confident in her command. She began by listing the year's accomplishments, a litany of trivial victories that included a successful campaign to remove a neighbor's unapproved garden gnome. The neighbors, a mix of the apathetic and the cowed, simply nodded. And now, Brenda announced, her voice echoing in the quiet room, we move on to new business. I'm proposing a series of new bylaws to address the growing issue of aesthetic pollution in our community. She held up a thick stack of papers. These new bylaws will provide clarity on everything from approved mailbox colors to the precise dimensions of welcome mats and, of course, the proper decorum for front porch activities. She looked directly at Alex, a triumphant smirk on her lips. It was a thinly veiled jab, a public display of her power. She thought she had him cornered, but Alex didn't flinch. He slowly rose from his chair in the third row, the rustle of his movements drawing every eye in the room. Brenda's smirk vanished. I have a question, Brenda, Alex said, his voice calm and clear, a stark contrast to the buzzing tension. The Q&A period is after the new bylaws have been voted on. Alex, she snapped, a hint of steel in her tone, please, sit down. This isn't a question about the bylaws, Alex countered, holding up a printout of the HOA minutes Sarah had found. It's about the legitimacy of this meeting, and the legitimacy of your position as president. A ripple of gasps went through the room. Brenda's eyes widened, her face turning from condescension to pure, unadulterated panic. That is an outrageous accusation, she hissed into the microphone. I demand you sit down immediately, or you will be removed from this meeting. Remove me. But it won't change the facts, Alex continued, his resolve hardening. You were never lawfully elected president. According to the bylaws, which I've had the pleasure of reviewing in painstaking detail, the president must be a primary homeowner for at least 10 years. Brenda, you and your husband moved in 8 years ago. He held up the document. Here are the records from the county. And here, he said, turning to show the page to the people closest to him, are the minutes from the election you called unanimous, except it wasn't. The vote was 15 to 14. Your signature is here, declaring a unanimous decision, which is a lie. Your entire election was invalid because you were not qualified to run. Every fine you've issued since then, every bylaw you've proposed, it's all invalid. The room erupted. Whispers turned into shouts. The other board members on the stage looked at each other in confusion and alarm. Sarah and Mrs. Gable stood up, holding their own copies of the documents, confirming Alex's words. He's right. Mrs. Gable's voice cut through the noise. She fined me for my rose trellis. It was a power trip. She tried to fine us for our welcome mat. Mark shouted. It was just a flimsy piece of carpet. Brenda's composure completely shattered. Her face, now a furious crimson, was contorted with rage. She gripped the podium so hard her knuckles turned white. This is a conspiracy, a smear campaign. You are all in violation of the order of this meeting. She screamed, her voice cracking. I am still the president. I will have you all removed. But her words had no power. The crowd had turned on her. She was no longer the all-powerful HOA president. She was a woman caught in a lie. The authority she had wielded so ruthlessly was crumbling before her eyes. She had lost control of the narrative, and with it, her power. The climax had been reached, and Brenda Karen's reign of terror was over. The public confrontation left the HOA meeting in chaos. Brenda Karen, her face a mask of shock and fury, stormed out of the clubhouse, clutching her clipboard as if it were the last remnant of her shattered authority. The remaining neighbors, once a silent and submissive group, were now buzzing with a newfound energy. The other board members, having just witnessed the complete and total collapse of their president's power, quickly called for an emergency vote to officially revoke her position. Within minutes, the motion passed with a unanimous, resounding yes. The aftermath was a scene of collective relief. For the first time in years, neighbors lingered after a meeting, not to complain in hushed whispers, but to laugh and celebrate. The board, now led by a new, far more reasonable temporary president, immediately voided every fine Brenda had issued, including the ridiculous ones for Alex's coffee and Mrs. Gable's roses. They also promised a complete review of the bylaws, to remove any ambiguous or overreaching language. For Alex, the victory felt immense. It wasn't about the money he saved from the fines. It was about the peace he had lost and was now getting back. The victory wasn't his alone, either. The next day, he found a small, potted plant on his porch, a perfect little terracotta pot with a note from Mrs. Gable. It simply read, "Thank you for the freedom." In the coffee, he smiled, feeling a connection to his neighbors he hadn't before. A few weeks later, with the dust settled and the community returning to a more relaxed state, Alex was finally able to get back to his routine. He woke up early, the sun filtering through the leaves, and walked out onto his porch. He sat in his chair, the world feeling right again. He had his French press, his favorite mug, and the quiet company of the morning. He had just taken his first sip when he heard a new, familiar sound. It wasn't the sharp click of high heels. It was a new, softer shuffle of shoes on the pavement. He looked up, and there, walking her dog, was Brenda Karen. She was dressed in a simple jogging suit, and her hair was pulled back into a ponytail. She still carried herself with a stiff purpose, but there was a new, deflated quality to her posture. She saw Alex, and for a moment, her eyes widened, a flicker of that old fire. Then, almost imperceptibly, her shoulders slumped. She looked away, pretending not to see him, and quickly shuffled past, her gaze fixed on the ground. Alex watched her go. He felt no triumph, no anger, just a strange sense of irony. The woman who had tried to police his morning coffee was now the one avoiding his gaze. He took another long, slow sip of his coffee, savoring the taste and the feeling of absolute, uninterrupted peace. His ritual was his again, a small but powerful victory in a suburban war no one ever saw coming. And, this time, it was perfect.